Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest went on a brief journey during his near-death experience, spiritually speaking, which ultimately led to an earthly long-distance journey. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Mr. Sean Enright. Sean, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thanks, Lamont. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Now, going back to that long distance journey, I understand that you are actually coming to us from Thailand. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very fascinating. And we will get into how you got there once we get into your actual near-death experience. But before we get into your near-death experience, why don't you tell us if there were any previous religious belief systems you may have held prior to having your near-death experience?
Well, I was brought up by though they were both born to Episcopal families. My parents believed that we should each choose our own beliefs. So I was brought up in an environment that was very open. And while my sister, I have a younger sister, while she ultimately did get baptized at some point towards the end of high school, I when my interest in God or something greater started occurring around 10 or 11 years old, I transferred out of Montessori into Catholic school, and there was an experience somewhere in there where because I was a pretty good kid, but I felt guilt about something. And so I went to confession the first time, because that's what Catholics do when guilt is present. And it didn't work for me. It didn't lift my guilt. I can't speak for anybody else's experience, but at that point, I kind of wrote off religion, at least traditional religion. And that's where I was at. I was a typical teenage kid in it actually happened the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in college.
So it sounds like you tried the Catholic route. You tried to have that guilt lifted. You went to the priest for confession, and the guilt remained. Later on, at some point, however, you have a near-death experience. Why don't you tell us what it was that actually triggered that near-death experience to occur?
I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, went to the toilet, came back into my bedroom. I was a teenager back at my parents' home after my first year in college, and so I closed and locked the door, turned out the lights, and I all I had to do was make it across the room in the dark. But when I reached my bed, because I couldn't see where I was, I put one knee down and I went to put my hands down, and I was at the very end of the bed at a funny angle. There was no bed there anymore. And I mean, where I went to put my hands down. And so I fell to the floor. And the previous day, I had been out on a recreational reservoir, wakeboarding and drinking and smoking weed. And I'd come home and I'd filled a glass of water and taken it up to bed with me. And I had plopped down on the floor to peel my clothes off. And I left that glass of water on the floor. And so when I fell in the dark, my shin hit something. And there was a very acute awareness of that occurring. I didn't feel any pain. Okay. But I figured I better, and my mind very quickly concluded, oh, your shin hit that glass. And so when I went to get myself up off the floor, I felt around on the floor around me before doing so in case I'd broken that glass. Because I didn't feel pain, right? So I didn't think I'd injured myself at this point. But when I went to feel around on the floor, basically it was like a warm summer hose spraying out my leg. And I'd managed to, it was one of those octagonal shaped water glasses, and I'd managed to break it in a way that it made 2 daggers and cut one of my main arteries in 3, along with, as I would find out very shortly after that, along with all 3 shin muscles. Because when I went to try to stand up the first time, I collapsed when I put weight on that leg because I had a limp foot. So anyways, I screamed for my mom because I was a mama's boy. My parents are still married, but mine went to mom. And then it was like, oh my God, I locked the door. I got to get across the room to the door. And I got myself up, hopped across the room on one foot and out into the hallway. And for my parents, man, it must have been a Stephen King image, because that home, we had white carpet, and I probably made a Jackson Pollock out of it. So they came out of their bedroom, saw me. My dad was like, let me get some clothes on. We'll get you in the car into the hospital. And I said, I'm not going to make it that far, call an ambulance. I laid down, and my mom came over and just kind of started running her hands through my hair, comforting me. And I was just focused on breathing because life was going out of me really quickly. And I knew I was dying. There was no like panic or fear. It was a very natural process. And then when I had no more strength, it just went from Sean dying on the floor to an experience without any form, without any identity or character. That was all shed, and it was oneness or nothingness. There was no platform for thinking because there was no 2 things. Without any thinking, there was no stress, no suffering. And the remaining experience behind all that was just this divine love, this perfect mixture of freedom and peace that there was nothing to be free from, nothing to disturb the peace. And then, however long passed, it was probably 5, 6, 7 minutes before the ambulance got there. But the next thing was, I'm back in body with tubes down my nose and paramedics around me. And then one of the paramedics asking, do I know where I am? What's your name? There was hypersensitivity, so I was aware of like the air tank hissing and 2 sets of feet walking on the wood floors, a floor below. And when they got to the carpeted stairs, and then 2 people appear with a stretcher. And then kind of, we're gonna roll you on your side and put me on the stretcher and carry me down to the ambulance. So that's what happens.
Yeah, you mentioned Stephen King. Interestingly enough, it sounds like that entire scenario of you leaving the glass out, falling on the glass, creating daggers, having the door locked. It kind of reminded me of the Final Destination series. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but it's
I'm aware of it, but I've never watched the series. I've probably caught little snippets. Isn't the female actress, I can't remember her name.
Well, there's several parts to it. I think it's part 6 or 5 they're up to now, but it's just a series of unfortunate events where people just leave a candy wrapper behind, by the way, and that candy wrapper later on is the cause for their death. Now going into your death experience, I noticed you said that you went into complete nothingness. Did you feel that you actually left your body at some point, or were you just in this other place of nothingness instantaneously?
No, it was instantaneous. It just went from when that last breath, when I ran out of energy to do that anymore, it just went from here to there. There was no journey. I've been on journeys. There was no journey.
And that's many near death experiencers do talk about just instantaneously going to some other place rather than through a tunnel or having an out of body experience. Now, what exactly did you visualize there? Was there light? Was there darkness?
No,
What?
no, no. There's none of those senses even existed. So that's what I mean. It's hard for mind works in duality, right? And we're talking about a singularity. So there is no second thing. There is this one thing. It's a beingness, right? It has awareness, but there's nothing other than the being to be aware of, and that being has no. There's no conditions to create fear or stress or to even think about something because there's no second thing. And it's not like we're bringing our knowledge from this present incarnation into that. It's like you've gone into a complete brainwash or what, it's been washed, right? So there, and that state is accessible in other ways. You don't have to die for that. That there are ways to get into that through meditation, but we also have to be able to let go of what this is to do that.
But you did state that you felt something. You talked about something called divine love. What exactly did that feel like?
Well, I would say it's the absence of everything else. It's just what's behind it all, right? So, as I said, it's kind of this sense of a perfect balance of peace and freedom, but there's nothing to be free from. So, again, mind works in concepts and duality. So it's kind of like saying, oh, that person's confident, when the reality of it is they just have no fear, right? That confidence is not actually a real thing, right? We're trying to describe a conditional state of that person, right? So when there's only one thing, okay, we can say it's love, but most people, I don't mean to be insulting, but I don't think most people really understand what love is. First, we have a number of different values placed on that word, and so it's unchanging. Unlike the rest of what we experience in duality, everything changes. Some of it changes very slowly, but there's growth and decay in everything, right? Even the sun is going to die at some point. So that state is the only thing I'm aware of that's unchanging. And it has a sense that it's like this pure potential, but it's unformed. It's taken no conditional state yet.
Now, you said that when you woke up, you had tubes down your throat and you were in the hospital and people were.
Down my no, I was still on the carpet. That was down my nose. They had been doing the oxygen squeeze thing on me. So when she saw my eyes come back to, she took that off and started asking me questions. But that was still on the carpet floor.
At any given time, did the medical personnel tell you that you had died?
No given time.
But you were simply able to feel that being in this separated place, being in this place of oneness, and you knew that you weren't in Kansas anymore. In other words,
Yeah, well, in that state, there's no knowing of anything. There's just one experience, and it's unchanging. There's no personhood. There's no individuality. There's again, it's very hard to, we use words to try to convey a level of the experience to other people. And because mind works in duality and we're talking about a singularity, mind can't really grasp what that is without having experienced it.
That the experience is ineffable in a way. It's very hard to explain, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into spiritual teachings, and this crosses all the different faiths, but when you get into people who achieve basically sainthood, they all are trying to describe a very similar thing. It's probably my favorite metaphor that I recall, and I couldn't tell you who exactly is credited for it, but is basically the drop of water returning to the ocean. And it was a raindrop at some point. That's one experience. But when it goes back into the ocean, there's a different experience, right? And there's no ending of that self, maybe, of that existence in the ocean for the drop. So there's no way to tell if it's all on the size of a pin needle or it's the entirety of a multiverse. Who knows?
So let's move forward. After your experience, I'm sure the mental wheel started turning now about what you had just experienced. What did life look like afterwards?
I went into a depression for the following 6 or 7 months, and I was home for I'd gone back to university, and then I was home for Christmas break, and I went to my mom and was like, I've fallen off the ball and I don't know how to get back on. There was a sense that a new me had been born, but the old me hadn't died. And so I was left with some internal conflict. Um, my mom kind of handed me this thing that she's like, maybe this is for you. It came in the mail. And it basically said motivational seminar to me. And I had gone through a series of seminars when I was a little younger. I had conflict with my little sister, and so my parents sent us to this set of seminars, and all I learned from that was I didn't want to do one of those again. So I had some resistance, but I decided, okay, I'll try. And I went, and the information, it was a manifestation based seminar. And the information in those 2 days, because it was just a weekend, was phenomenal for me. I ended up with a mentor out of that experience. There was also something else that was kind of latent there in the background after my near-death experience, which was I knew I had to go to India. And to be honest, I was a pretty ignorant, almost 19-year-old kid who I probably couldn't have pointed India out on a map. So I went to India, and I'd never seen the kind of deprivation in the human condition that I saw there. And there was this weird kind of mix of interest and shame, wanting to look at it and not wanting to look at it. And there was kind of a moment where I had to decide either I'm going to shut it out and put on some horse blinders, or I'm going to let it in. And I let it in, and my heart opened, and that was the first of many trips to come, not just to India. Anyways, the influence of meditation, and that would become a pretty important part of what proceeded in my life. A lot of my travels were trying to find a way to resolve the conflict I had been left with from the near-death experience. And so I would go and do different meditation practices looking for one that had the solution. I had already added psychology to my studies, and it was very clear to me rather quickly that Western psychology had not gotten to a point where they could really talk about healing. It was more a level of maintenance in most cases, and at this point, I understand why it was not effective. It's become a little more effective because they've pulled mindfulness out of some of these holistic systems. We think Buddhism is a religion. You could say something similar about Hinduism, but to a lesser degree. But Buddhism is actually a holistic system for coming to full realization of what we really are. There's no central God involved in it. It centers around meditation practice. Different schools of Buddhism that may vary a bit what the meditation is, but it's all basically taking the scientific method and turning it inward, and it is a science. So are some of the Hindu practices.
You talked about the science of meditation, et cetera, and coming into contact with this after your near-death experience. Many near-death experiencers also, when they come back from a near-death experience, tend to talk about coming back with what we call after effects. For example, some may come back with bouts of precognition, higher empathy levels. They lack the fear of death. They may have premonitions, etc. Did you come back with anything remotely close to these, or anything different about you upon your return?
Well, I mean, it was obvious that I'm not body. I mean, that was the first fundamental. I had a lot of phenomenal experiences that followed. You talked about premonition. So my mother called me, and she said, your father's out of town and I need to talk to somebody. Can you come by the house? And what followed was exactly like a dream I had, I don't know, 3 to 6 months previous to that, where I got there, she wasn't there. I'm rummaging through the fridge because I want a snack. I'm hungry. And then she comes in and she proceeded to tell me that she had been having all these medical tests because her energy was really low, and they had found a lemon-sized tumor in her colon. And in the dream ceased, or at least any memory of what followed ceased after she told me. It was like preparation for this moment. And so in reality, when she told me, I looked at her and I said, "Don't worry. I've dreamt about this already. You're going to be fine." And the way the words came out, the surety they came out with, she kind of just looked at me with, "Wow, yeah, you're right. I am going to be fine."
Back to the system we were referring to of Buddhism, would you consider yourself a Buddhist post near-death experience?
No, though my central practices are Buddhist or Taoist. But I've collected things. I mentioned, one of my early spiritual teachers was a Russian shaman. I don't, and if you go exploring in the spiritual realms, there's no religion. So I don't subscribe to that. I think that those systems can be beneficial, but you also still have to develop discernment, and clinging to rituals and beliefs. Belief is mind clutter. It is one of those layers of illusion that fogs our vision. And so even when we travel and we explore in spiritual dimensions, mind is going to go about constructing an understanding of what this is, right? And that can easily move into becoming a belief. Whereas I think it's a healthier position to take, that's a hypothesis. It's a work in progress, and I don't know that you can ever know for sure. the oneness behind it all, I would say this kind of appears to be self-entertainment. That none of it's so serious. And it's here for play, for exploration, and probably also to be able to have the juxtaposition to realize how lovely that our true nature really is. But because that true nature is unchanging, and when you're in it, it's eternal. There's no sense of time, right? That is a singular experience, and for whatever reason, maybe we also want other experiences. So we have the capability of enjoying both singularity and duality, and maybe the more we visit that singularity, we become more loving, we become more kind, we become more thoughtful of the other parts of ourselves. We talk about the parts of the body, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the spleen, the liver, pancreas, the blood, the bones, but it's all part of the whole. And if one part isn't doing its job, it starts to break down, right? And so if we as humans were to start thinking about, oh, we're all part of the whole, how should I behave to be a healthy part of the whole? And really, I think that should start within family. Learn to become a healthy family member. I think that's the best thing everybody is capable of doing. There's no barrier to entry. There's no cost, right? So everybody has that access to be able to be that. And if you can do it in your own family, then start doing it with everybody you have contact with. Express gratitude for little things. We are so easy to get sucked into pulling people down in our daily life. It's just as easy to pull them up. It doesn't take more energy.
And what you're describing sounds very much what near-death experiencers describe as our purpose: to explore, to experience, to bring light to where there are patches of darkness. And what you're describing about being a better family member and then a better community leader, community member, a better worldwide neighbor, ultimately, kind of puts us on that particular path.
Yeah, I mean, for me, traveling was the follow-up to university. It was my next level of education, and it was really educating myself about how to just be human, not American or male or whatever, right? And then it goes beyond that into just be life. Yeah, in the West, they might want to put me in a hospital. In the East, you're gifted.
Well, I just want to put you on a podcast to share the power of your near-death experience as we, compare it to others and put together this puzzle. I think different near-death experiences that I'm listening to and interviewing and reading about, I think they all have a piece of a puzzle that if we put it together, we can get the bigger spiritual picture, even though there's always going to be a mystery behind it.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult experience for people to go through. And I think one of the most difficult aspects can be if they cling to it.
Well, once again, Sean, thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us your amazing account.
You're welcome, Lamont. Nice to meet you.
Same here. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sean Enright.